Welcome back to another episode of Pointless History for Sleep, where the facts are strange, the storytelling is slow, and nothing you're about to hear is remotely important enough to stay awake for. So go ahead, melt into your blankets, sink into your pillow, and let your mind drift far away from the modern world. Tonight, we're traveling through marble halls, perfumed corridors, and velvet-draped bedchambers to explore the baffling, bewildering, and often completely disgusting hygiene habits of royals throughout history. Because while kings and queens had gold-plated everything, their relationship with cleanliness was surprisingly questionable. Scene 1. The Perfumed Sun King. Let's begin with a man who was, in his own words, the very embodiment of the state, Louis XIV of France, the self-proclaimed Sun King. He ruled for over 72 years, presiding over the glittering palace of Versailles, a symbol of opulence and power. But beneath the powdered wigs and gilded chandeliers, things were not quite so pristine. Louis, like many nobles of the 17th century, believed that water was dangerous, not dangerous in the slippery when wet kind of way, but in the this will ruin your health and possibly kill you kind of way. So instead of bathing regularly, Louis bathed twice in his entire adult life, at least according to palace gossip, to cover the resulting aroma. He layered on perfume, buckets of it, florals, musks, and exotic oils filled the air around him. Servants sprayed his clothes, his bedding, even the furniture. Versailles didn't just shine, it reeked of rose and ambergris, and when something started to smell particularly suspicious, they didn't clean it. They simply replaced it, or tossed more perfume on top. A kind of royal air freshener strategy, if you will. Scene 2. The Queen Who Rarely Bathed. Now let's drift further north, to England, where Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, reigned with majesty, intellect, and a famously fierce temper. She also had a famously rare bathing schedule. Despite having access to what was, for the time, quite luxurious bathing facilities, Elizabeth reportedly bathed once a month, and only then whether she needed it or not. She relied instead on scented linen, oils and powders to maintain her iconic white appearance, and perhaps to ward off any inconvenient odors. Her skin was also coated in lead-based makeup, so even if she had wanted to scrub clean, it would have taken more than a loofah to get it off. And let's not forget her teeth. By the end of her reign, they were reportedly black and decayed from her love of sweets. But in portraits, still pristine. The royal illusion, as always, was more important than reality. Let's float now to a place few dared mention aloud, the royal restroom. You see, in many grand palaces, there were no flushing toilets, no powder rooms with gentle lighting and lavender-scented soap. Instead, chamber pots were a staple of daily life for nobles and servants alike, and they weren't always tucked away discreetly. Sometimes they were brought right to the dinner table. Yes, right there, hidden behind a screen, or sometimes not at all. At Versailles, courtiers were so eager to stay close to the king, to be seen, to be noticed, to be favored, that they would relieve themselves in hallways or stairwells rather than miss a moment. In His Majesty's presence, the palace stank of ambition and something less poetic, and yet no one questioned it. That was just royal life, lavish on the surface, less so beneath the silks. Let's drift now to Italy, where Catherine de' Medici brought not only political intrigue to France, but also an unusual contribution to personal hygiene: poisoned perfume. Or so the rumors went. She was known for her scented gloves, infused with heavy perfumes meant to mask the grime of unwashed hands. But some whispered that her gloves were laced with toxins. Enemies of the Queen would die not by sword, but by handshake. Whether true or not, the trend of perfumed gloves caught on like wildfire. Royals across Europe adopted the practice, not realizing the real danger lay in never actually washing their hands at all. Then there was King James I of England, who had a deep, almost spiritual fear of water. He believed that bathing was bad for the health, that water opened the skin's pores and let in disease. Instead of washing, he had his clothes changed constantly, every morning, every night, layers upon layers. In his mind, changing clothes was the same as getting clean, and so the scent of stale fabric, cologne, and royal sweat followed him like a cloak. Ironically, it was often the poor who were cleaner, bathing in rivers, in wooden tubs, in public bathhouses, while the rich were too afraid or too fashionable to touch water at all. And finally, let's not forget the plague. In the 14th through 18th centuries, many believed that bathing could actually cause illness. Doctors advised against it. The pores, they believed, opened up the body to bad air, also known as miasma, thought to be the invisible carrier of disease. So rather than scrub down, royals powdered up. Hair, skin, and clothing were all dusted in layers of white and floral scents. Cleanliness was an illusion, a theatrical performance played out with fans, wigs, and ribbons. And yet, somehow, it worked. These eccentric, often repulsive habits became normal, even enviable. A new courtier might mimic the Sun King's perfume routine, or buy lace gloves doused in bergamot and musk. In the royal courts of Europe, hygiene was not about health. It was about status, illusion, and scent. And so, as your eyes grow heavier and your breath deepens into stillness, let your thoughts fade from the perfumes and powders of the past and slip quietly into sleep. Because in the end, history doesn't always make sense, and it certainly doesn't always smell good. Good night. But we're not quite done drifting. Not yet. Let's float now to a chilly morning in 18th century Russia, where Tsar Peter the Great had his own views on hygiene. Unlike many of his royal peers, Peter believed in the power of cleanliness, but not in the way you might expect. He thought cleanliness could only be achieved through forced discipline. So he established laws requiring his subjects to shave their beards and keep their bodies clean, under penalty of fine. But as for his own habits, they were famously chaotic. He would rise early, unbathed, and storm through the halls of his palace with a heavy smell of alcohol and sweat, demanding productivity from the sleepy nobles around him. He also had a habit of personally performing autopsies on corpses, shirtless, sweaty, and entirely uninterested in washing up afterward. Hygiene for others was a rule. For himself, more of a theory. Let's wander now through the winding corridors of early Tudor England, where Henry VIII, bloated with power and meat pies, preferred his hygiene to be ceremonially. His baths were great wooden tubs draped in velvet and silk, filled not just with hot water, but with herbs, flowers, and even milk. He would sometimes bathe to impress foreign dignitaries, a royal performance of cleanliness. But the water was rarely changed, and attendants might reuse the same scented concoction multiple times. His legs, afflicted by painful ulcers, were often wrapped in cloths soaked in rosewater and vinegar. The result was fragrant, but not in the way one hoped. Meanwhile, his court was no better. Many nobles used pomanders, small decorative bowls filled with aromatic spices, which they carried or wore to mask foul odors in crowded, unwashed halls. They believed that sweet smells could keep disease at bay, creating a kind of invisible barrier between their perfumed noses and the rest of the world. Let's drift even further back to ancient Rome, where the emperors had access to vast public baths, steaming caldariums, and marble pools. But even here, there were oddities. Sponges on sticks were used in place of toilet paper, shared between bathers, rinsed only in salty water. Soap, as we know it, didn't exist. Instead, oil was rubbed on the skin, then scraped off with a curved blade called a strigil. The wealthy might have slaves do this for them, ensuring their bodies were smooth and glistening, even if the tools were never truly cleaned. And yet, Roman baths were considered the height of sophistication. Cleanliness was a social event, a ritual, a conversation, a performance. In many ways, it was less about being clean and more about being seen. Back in Versailles, the palace was so overrun with filth, spilled food, chamber pots, body odor, and animal waste that visitors sometimes fainted from the stench. But the walls were gilded. The gowns were exquisite. The illusion was maintained, and that, perhaps, is the strange heart of royal hygiene. Not cleanliness itself, but the appearance of it. So as your eyes close fully now, and the fog of sleep settles gently over your mind, you can rest assured, no matter how disheveled your bedhead may be, no matter how long it's been since your last shower, at least you didn't perfume a chamber pot, and at least you bathed more than a king. Good night, dear dreamer. May your sleep be peaceful and infinitely cleaner than history. Now let us drift eastward into the candle-lit palaces of 18th century Ottoman sultans, where luxury met ritual and bathing was considered both spiritual and sensual. The sultans, unlike their European counterparts, placed great importance on bathing, but it was not the quick, steamy showers we know today. Their baths were ceremonies, long, slow, and indulgent. Entire rooms were built for the ritual. Hammams filled with warm marble, rising steam and scented oils. The Sultan would recline on heated stones while attendants scrubbed his skin with rough mitts and poured bowls of rose water over his body. The ritual could take hours, silence was sacred. The entire experience was meditative, almost holy. And yet, outside the palace walls, most citizens couldn't afford the luxury. They used sand, clay, or even ashes to cleanse themselves. The royal standard of cleanliness, a privilege and a performance. Let your thoughts wander now to medieval France, where the nobility believed certain foods affected how their bodies smelled. Garlic and onions were avoided not for their taste, but for their vulgar vapors. It was thought that eating heavily scented herbs like lavender and mint would actually purify the body from the inside out. There were nobles who consumed nothing but rose petal syrup and sugared violets, hoping to sweat floral notes in summer. Imagine that, a person so committed to fragrance, they tried to become the perfume itself. And as you rest your head and drift further down, we come to perhaps the strangest royal hygiene habit of them all. King Christian VII of Denmark, who ruled in the late 1700s, was known for his eccentric behavior, often blamed on mental illness, but also perhaps on the sheer isolation of royal life. He reportedly refused to wash his hands, refused to wear clean clothes, and once sliced buttons off his own jacket in boredom. His courtiers were told not to correct or disturb him, so instead of encouraging better hygiene, they applauded it. They cheered his strange outbursts. In many ways, royal hygiene was dictated not by medical advice, but by fear, tradition, and the whims of those in power. Now slowly, imagine yourself walking barefoot through a silent hallway lit only by flickering lanterns. The walls are lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs, powdered and posed, their skin painted pale and flawless. You know their secrets now. You know they wore the same undergarments for weeks, that their perfumes masked more than just sweat, that their crowns were heavy and often itchy. You pass by a golden mirror. In it, you don't see your reflection, only a cloud of white powder drifting lazily through the air. Everything is soft, faded, and still. There is no smell, no sound, only silence and the slow unraveling of history's illusions. You arrive at a velvet armchair at the end of the corridor. You sink into it. The cushion breathes a sigh beneath your weight. Above you a chandelier sways, dripping soft candlelight. It is time to sleep. Let the centuries fold over you like a warm blanket. Let powdered wigs and perfumed gloves disappear into fog. Let royal absurdities be someone else's problem. You are safe here. Clean, quiet, dreaming. Far beyond the velvet halls of Europe, past the snow-dusted roofs of Russia and the perfumed steam of Ottoman baths, we glide now toward the high walls of imperial China, where emperors ruled not only with wisdom and strategy, but with ritual that extended even to their hygiene. The emperor of the Qing dynasty, draped in silk robes, embroidered with dragons and clouds, began each day not with water, but with a small gilded spoon. You see, royal attendants were tasked with scraping the emperor's tongue before he spoke to anyone. It was believed that bad breath could insult the heavens, that the emperor's mouth must be as pure as his rule, A polished copper mirror, held in silence, reflected each ritual movement as the emperor's face was powdered, his hair combed, his nails cleaned with carved ivory picks, and yet he did not bathe himself. That task belonged to others, eunuchs and concubines who worked quietly in warm, dimly lit chambers, washing the royal body with silk cloths soaked in chrysanthemum tea. Across the sea, in medieval Japan, samurai followed strict codes not only of conduct, but of cleanliness. Baths were sacred, taken not for pleasure, but for discipline. A warrior might bathe before battle, believing that to die dirty was dishonorable, but they too feared the danger of water lingering on the skin, so they would dry themselves with fine paper and ashes, then burn the used paper in a small ceremonial bowl, sending the day's impurities into smoke. In the rural homes of noble Japanese families, hair was not simply brushed. It was combed with oil and incense, each stroke releasing calming scent into the air. Some believed that the spirit lived in the hair, and so it must be treated with reverence, not vanity. Elsewhere, still, in the Incan Empire, far before European contact, ritual cleansing involved not perfume but altitude. In the Andes Mountains, Incan royalty would journey to sacred hot springs carved into cliff sides, where mineral waters steamed under the cold sky. They bathed not in private luxury, but beneath stars and sun gods, believing the water itself whispered prayers back into their skin. There were no silks, no powders, no wigs, but the intention was the same: to purify, to prepare, to stand apart from the common world, even in sweat and sweat. And now, as your breath slows and your limbs grow heavy, picture yourself stepping into one of these ancient baths, not as a king, not as a queen, just a wandering soul. The marble is warm beneath your feet. Steam curls like soft ribbon around your shoulders. The air smells of roses or sandalwood or river stones baked in sun. You let go of time, of titles, of expectation. You are clean, you are free, you are drifting. And yet, the dream continues. There was once a queen of Portugal who feared water so deeply that she ordered a wax coating to be applied over her entire body. Arms, legs, torso, even between her fingers, in the belief that it would seal her skin from sickness. For years, she allowed no washing, only more wax, layered like candle drippings upon her. When at last she passed away, attendants discovered her sealed in layers of pale, cracked wax like a doll from another world. There was an Austrian archduchess who believed eating flowers could purify her soul, so she dined on pressed violets and candied rose petals, served on plates of white porcelain, her lips stained pink with petal sugar. Her breath, they said, smelled like a garden in bloom. Her servants, however, said otherwise. There was a prince in Bavaria who slept in a bed filled with herbs instead of sheets. Lavender, thyme, sage, and lemon balm, replaced nightly, piled in a soft nest beneath him. He believed it would keep nightmares away And perhaps it did, but it also kept visitors away. The scent was overwhelming, like lying in a kitchen cupboard or an apothecary's drawer. And even in the icy courts of Sweden, Queen Christina, who famously rejected conventional gender roles, also rejected traditional hygiene. She reportedly wore the same clothes for weeks, detested bathing, and preferred to sleep in her library, surrounded by books and ink rather than silk and soap. Her scent, one ambassador noted, could not be ignored nor forgotten. But who were we to judge? These kings and queens were not trying to smell good. They were trying to survive, to symbolize power, to exist in a time when filth was not just normal. It was invisible, unspoken, cultural. And now, here you are, alone in the quiet of the present. No powdered wig, no rose-scented gloves, no chamber pot in the hallway. Only the hum of nighttime around you, the stillness of your bed, and the gentle rise and fall of your breath. History is far behind us now, a trail of odd rituals and forgotten perfumes fading into sleep, and still the dream hums on, if you wish to follow it, far beyond the velvet halls of Europe, past the snow-dusted roofs of Russia and the perfumed steam of Ottoman baths. We glide now toward the high walls of imperial China, where emperors ruled not only with wisdom and strategy, but with ritual that extended even to their hygiene. The emperor of the Qing dynasty, draped in silk robes embroidered with dragons and clouds, began each day not with water, but with a small, gilded spoon. You see, royal attendants were tasked with scraping the emperor's tongue before he spoke to anyone. It was believed that bad breath could insult the heavens, that the emperor's mouth must be as pure as his rule. A polished copper mirror, held in silence, reflected each ritual movement as the emperor's face was powdered, his hair combed, his nails cleaned with carved ivory picks. And yet, he did not bathe himself. That task belonged to others, eunuchs and concubines, who worked quietly in warm, dimly lit chambers, washing the royal body with silk cloths soaked in chrysanthemum tea. Across the sea, in medieval Japan, samurai followed strict codes, not only of conduct, but of cleanliness. Baths were sacred, taken not for pleasure but for discipline. A warrior might bathe before battle, believing that to die dirty was dishonorable, but they too feared the danger of water lingering on the skin. So they would dry themselves with fine paper and ashes, then burn the used paper in a small ceremonial bowl, sending the day's impurities into smoke. In the rural homes of noble Japanese families, hair was not simply brushed, it was combed with oil and incense, each stroke releasing calming scent into the air. Some believed that the spirit lived in the hair, and so it must be treated with reverence, not vanity. Elsewhere still, in the Incan Empire, far before European contact, ritual cleansing involved not perfume, but altitude. In the Andes Mountains, Incan royalty would journey to sacred hot springs carved into cliffsides, where mineral waters steamed under the cold sky. They bathed not in private luxury, but beneath stars and sun gods, believing the water itself whispered prayers back into their skin. There were no silks, no powders, no wigs, but the intention was the same: to purify, to prepare, to stand apart from the common world, even in sweat and scent. And now, as your breath slows and your limbs grow heavy, picture yourself stepping into one of these ancient baths. Not as a king, not as a queen, just a wandering soul. The marble is warm beneath your feet. Steam curls like soft ribbon around your shoulders. The air smells of roses, or sandalwood, or river stones baked in sun. You let go of time, of titles, of expectation. You are clean, you are free, you are drifting. And yet, the dream continues. There was once a queen of Portugal who feared water so deeply that she ordered a wax coating to be applied over her entire body. Arms, legs, torso, even between her fingers, in the belief that it would seal her skin from sickness. For years, she allowed no washing, only more wax, layered like candle drippings upon her. Welcome, dear listener. She passed away. Let your shoulders drop. Attendants discovered her sealed in layers of pale, cracked wax like a doll with me from in a softer space. There was an Austrian archduchess, a gentle unraveling, eating flowers. You don't have to follow every word. Soul. You can drift when you're ready. We're about to wander through the powdered corridors and velvet halls of 18th century fashion, plates of white, but not the useful kind. No, her lips. These are the styles that served no purpose, sugar, whispered no logic, and changed absolutely nothing except the air around her servants. This is fashion at its most gloriously unnecessary. This is pointless history for sleep. Instead of tonight, our subject is the ridiculous fashion trends of the 1700s. It begins with a wig, but not just any wig beneath him. This one reached so high it grazed the ceiling beams of French parlours and carriages. It did, but it also kept visitors away. This hairstyle was a sculpture of a powdered tower of pride and lying in a kitchen cupboard. Women of rank would sit for hours while their hair was teased, built up with horsehair. Queen Christina, who famously powdered to a ghostly white gender roles, but it wasn't complete until decorated. Traditional hygiene, perhaps with a small model of a naval battle for weeks, or a garden scene with porcelain birds, and preferred or even a replica of a beloved pet nestled among velvet roses. Rather than silk. Some wigs were so tall that they required custom carriages or seating with head holes. Not be ignored. Servants carried poles with hooks. But who were we to just to lift the wigs off without destroying them? Queens were in not Paris, trying to smell one particularly elaborate creation featured an entire windmill, which actually turned with a hidden mechanism in a time when triumph was artistry just normal and total pointlessness invisible. And then there were the gowns, cultural. Oh, the gowns. Gowns so wide they required doorways to be redesigned. Gowns with hoops that stretched over 4 feet from hip to hip, forcing women to walk sideways through hallways and sit on specially made benches. Only the hum. These gowns were constructed with wooden panniers, curved frames beneath the fabric to give that exaggerated bell shape of your breath. But they weren't built for movement. Behind us now. No. They were designed for rituals and forgotten perfumes fading, not for doing anything in. Still, one duchess reportedly wore a gown so enormous she needed 2 footmen just to lift it while she crossed the room. Another insisted on having a second dinner chair again, not for herself, but for her dress to rest in. Some garments weren't meant to be worn at all. In Vienna, it became fashionable to commission a unique bodice or waistcoat for the sole purpose of portraiture. Once the painting was complete, the garment would never be worn again, preserved like an artifact of status, A jacket might be lined in gold-threaded lace, matching the drapes in the background of the painting. Its purpose was not comfort, not utility. Its purpose was to exist once, forever, in oil and canvas, an idea made stitch. Then there were the fans, tools of flirtation, status, and coded conversation. A woman could say more with the flick of her fan than with an entire paragraph. Fan open? She's listening. Fan dropped? She's interested. Fan held near the lips? A secret. But the real luxury came in the fans hand-painted with miniature scenes, gardens, battles, love affairs, entire stories told in brushstrokes no larger than a thumbnail. One woman carried a fan that, when unfolded, revealed a detailed painting of her family estate, including the tree where she received her first kiss. She never opened it fully in public. Among men, cravats were the battlefield. These were long silk neck pieces that tied in elaborate knots and folds. One could spend hours perfecting a drape so flawless it seemed accidental. But it wasn't. No cravat was ever accidental. In fact, entire social rituals emerged where gentlemen would show off their neckwear in a sort of unspoken duel, each nodding politely while judging the precise lay of the linen. Some cravats were perfumed, others were starched to the point of immobility. One man's cravat was rumored to have required 3 valets and a full ironing board to achieve its daily shape. Stockings, too, had their moment. Gentlemen began commissioning stockings with embroidered poetry, lines of verse that would wrap around the calf in silver or blue thread. The finest pairs included secret messages only visible under candlelight, or only legible if you leaned very, very close. One such stocking reportedly read, "This leg walks toward nothing but longing." No one knows who he was walking toward or away from. Beauty marks became literal marks of communication. Little fabric dots, called mouches, were glued onto the face to signal emotions or availability. Near the eye meant passion, near the mouth suggested flirtation. Some wore several at once, crafting emotional constellations across their faces. A lady might enter a room with 7 beauty marks and exit with none, each one a gesture, an exchange, a chapter closed. Shoes followed suit. Not built for comfort, not even built for walking. In one fashionable circle, glass shoes were commissioned, hand-blown by artisans, lined with velvet, and worn only while reclining. A lady might arrive in slippers, carried on a silk cushion, put them on while seated, and never rise from her chaise. Some shoes were painted with tiny scenes. Others were filled with perfume beads that released a scent as her feet shifted slightly. One noblewoman had a pair of slippers made entirely of mirrored shards. She wore them once. They shattered. Jewelry wandered far from the neck and ears. In the 1700s, brooches began appearing on hats, gloves, and even at the base of parasols. Some parasols weren't for shade. They were for art, painted with the night sky or with musical notes that could be read when twirled. One lady's parasol opened to reveal a stitched poem, written line by line along each rib of the frame. It read, "I remain hidden unless you stand beside me in the rain." No one knew what it meant, but they remembered it. The most whispered about trend of the time was the paper gown, worn only once, made from pressed silk pulp, and often painted with a scene or letter, never meant to be read aloud. One woman wore a dress made from unsent love letters. She sat in it quietly at a salon, sipping tea. A man asked her about the fabric. She replied, every sentence was once nearly said, and all the while, perfume lingered in the air. Powders scented with rose, jasmine, tobacco, or even violet. Hair was powdered, gloves were powdered, even fans were dusted with scent. The goal was not to smell good, it was to be remembered by the nose. There were dresses that glowed under moonlight, cloaks that vanished in candlelit corners, walking sticks with secret compartments, rings that told time but only for the person wearing them, stockings that hummed with embroidery, and gowns that weighed as much as small dogs, swaying like hanging gardens as their wearers walked, slowly, purposefully, toward absolutely nothing. This was a time when elegance outranked practicality, when the highest honor was being remembered for something utterly useless, a whisper of powder, a flick of lace, a train of ribbon that trailed behind like a dream you could not quite catch. But of all the symbols of excess and elegance, perhaps none were so pointlessly perfect as the sleeves that didn't end. Some gowns were designed with sleeves that trailed behind the wearer, sweeping the ground like long silken tails. These trains weren't sewn to the hem, but to the arms, so that each gesture, each polite wave or fan flutter, was followed by yards of fabric whispering along the marble floors. One woman's sleeves were so long that 2 attendants were assigned to gather them before she passed through a doorway. Another preferred hers to drag, leaving behind faint trails of rose dust, deliberately scattered in her wake so that no one could mistake where she had been. The more useless the sleeve, the higher the esteem. Function was not the point, flow was. And what of the coats that buttoned over nothing? For men, frock coats were cut to fit like second skins, stitched with care, embroidered with gold, and studded with buttons so numerous they resembled armor. But many of those buttons had no corresponding holes. They were placed in spirals, diagonals, or even in patterns meant to mimic constellations. One aristocrat had his coat patterned to reflect the stars on the night of his birth. He called it his eternal sky, and wore it only during philosophical debates, despite the fact that he often fainted from the weight. Gloves followed a similar path into the beautifully bizarre. While gloves were once practical protection, in the courts of France and Prussia, they became canvases. Women wore gloves with tiny love poems stitched across the palm words, visible only when the glove was removed with care. Others were dyed in ombre shades to mimic the setting sun. One noble woman wore gloves made entirely from fine lace, with no leather at all. They did not warm the hand, or even cover it properly, but they fluttered beautifully when she gestured during conversation, like the wings of a silent moth. It was said that her words were forgettable, but her gloves were not. There were stockings dyed to match nothing, made in hues like seafoam or smoke, worn under gowns no one would ever lift. Gentlemen began collecting rare-colored stockings like gemstones. One pair was dyed with crushed beetles to achieve a rich crimson glow, seen only in lamplight. Another was dipped in ink from an extinct sea creature, dark as midnight and nearly illegal to own. These stockings were rarely shown. Their beauty was in being known, not seen. In Spain, a brief, luxurious obsession emerged. Scarves that could not be tied. They were spun from hair-fine threads, woven in patterns so delicate they collapsed when knotted. Women wore them draped across the arms or laid gently across the chest like fog. One silk merchant crafted a scarf that was nearly invisible in candlelight. He sold it as a whisper made visible. The Duchess who purchased it wore it only once during a séance. It was never seen again. Some nobles began ordering custom scent cloaks, outerwear infused with layers of fragrance so thick they created personal weather systems. One man's cloak was lined with crushed violets and cinnamon bark. Another's carried a faint hint of pine, citrus, and smoke, designed to mimic a distant forest fire. These cloaks were rarely worn for warmth. They were worn to arrive before the wearer did. A swirl of scent would enter the ballroom, and only seconds later would the figure emerge. By then, all heads had already turned. Even hand mirrors became fashion statements. Carried by both men and women, these mirrors were no longer used to check appearance, but to reflect carefully chosen fragments of the world around them. One noblewoman had a mirror etched with the phrase, "Look, but not at me." She held it while walking through the palace gardens, catching only pieces of roses, fountains, and sky. Another woman's mirror was cracked deliberately. She said it reminded her to never see herself completely. There were canes that didn't support, simply carried as symbols of elegance. Some contained hidden scrolls, tiny flasks, or miniature telescopes. One gentleman was rumored to have kept a list of his enemies rolled inside his ivory-topped cane. Another filled his with dried flowers from every garden he'd ever visited. He walked slowly, not out of necessity, but so the memories wouldn't shift too quickly. And yes, we mustn't forget the corsets, which were not always worn for shaping. Some were worn purely as exclamation, made of lace so delicate they couldn't be tightened. Some corsets were painted, gilded, or studded with pearls, designed to be seen but never touched. A lady of Florence wore a corset made entirely from fine gold chains, woven so loosely they offered no structure whatsoever. When asked why, she simply replied, "Because restraint should glitter." Then, in certain quiet corners of Europe, fashion grew stranger still. In one poetic trend, noblemen and women began requesting garments that matched dreams. A dream would be recited aloud to a tailor or seamstress, a staircase that dissolved into sky, or a room with no windows but endless wind, and from this a garment would be imagined. These were not costumes, they were moods, stitched and dyed and whispered into form. One dream coat was made entirely from layered silks, each fold representing a different emotion. It changed color depending on the lighting. Another dream dress had hidden pockets, each containing a note the wearer wrote in her sleep. No one ever read them, but she carried them everywhere. And then, as if to undo everything that had come before, some garments were made to vanish entirely. Transparent veils, capes so sheer they shimmered in sunlight, but were invisible in shadow. One woman wore a cloak woven with silver, so fine it looked like mist trailing behind her. When she walked past candles, the light flickered as if her presence bent it slightly. She was called the Lady of the Almost. She never confirmed her name. Time itself became a fabric to wear. One noble commissioned a suit dyed in hourly gradients, each panel a color representing a time of day. From the soft blush of dawn to the deep indigo of midnight, the suit darkened as the eye traveled downward. He wore it only at twilight. When asked why, he whispered, "So I can be everything at once." All of it. Every layered lace, every perfumed glove, every slipper that never touched earth, was a defiance of necessity. These fashions were declarations that beauty does not ask permission, that uselessness can be sacred, that nothing, absolutely nothing, is sometimes everything. You, dear listener, have wandered with me through an entire century of soft absurdities. You've walked past mirrors that whispered, fans that told secrets, dresses that remembered what you chose to forget. You floated gently through a powdered dream, and as the century turned, some garments became so private they were never shown at all. Embroidered nightshirts hidden beneath velvet blankets, slippers stitched with quotes from forgotten philosophers, undergarments scented with pressed petals, worn not for lovers, nor even for comfort, but for the quiet pleasure of beauty, known only to oneself. These were garments made for the inner room, the untouched hour. Not even the mirror was invited. One duchess famously owned an entire wardrobe of what she called her invisible collection, dresses no one ever saw, not even her maids. She would describe them aloud at dinner parties, in great poetic detail. A dress made of thundercloud silk, another that whispered every time she blinked. Some thought she was mad, others thought she was free. In a forgotten estate near the edge of Belgium, a reclusive nobleman began crafting clothing entirely from memory. He would describe them to a tailor without sketches. The jacket my father wore when he laughed for the first time, or the robe my mother hummed in before her letters stopped. These garments bore no pattern, no uniform stitch. They were imperfect, soft, and trembling with silence. He never wore them. They hung in a candlelit hall he called his archive of echoes. And perhaps the most poetic trend of all, the one never written about in books, only passed along in whispered salons, was the practice of garments buried with secrets. Some noble women began sewing small pieces of parchment into the hems of their gowns, words never spoken aloud, regrets, names. One woman's wedding dress was rumored to contain a hidden letter to someone she never married. Another stitched the word forgiven in golden thread beneath the final fold of her mourning veil. These garments were not destroyed. They were folded carefully and stored in cedar-lined chests, tucked in attics like dreams gone quiet. So much of 1700s fashion, you see, was not worn for the world. It was worn for the self, for the mirror, for the memory, for the myth. And if none of it mattered, that was precisely the point. The powdered wig that made no sense, the fan that sang a poem, the slipper that never touched ground, the glove that spoke to no one. They were not designed to help. They were not made to endure. They were made to shimmer once, like stardust in candlelight, and vanish. And now, you, dear listener, have been part of that vanishing. Your breath is soft. Your mind is warm. The powdered halls have gone dim. The silk has stopped rustling. The last beauty mark has fallen gently to the marble floor. Let them lie there. Let them rest. And somewhere, beyond the chandeliers and powdered salons, beyond the carriages and creaking corsets, the quietest trend of all was taking shape, the art of dressing for no one. In the twilight years of the 1700s, certain aristocrats began to retreat, not from luxury, but from audience. They dressed in solitude, robes sewn from starlight-colored muslin, slippers made from the fabric of worn-out prayer books. One woman commissioned a dressing gown embroidered entirely with her favorite words, words she said aloud only once, then never again. She called it her garment of goodbye. Another nobleman wore a velvet coat stitched with the names of every animal he'd ever loved. It had no buttons, no lining, no function. It was never seen in public, only in the garden at dusk when the sun touched it just enough to make it real. And so we see, even the most pointless fashions held something sacred, something unspoken, a story stitched in silence. Not all garments whispered. Some, in their own peculiar way, listened. There was a shawl in Italy lined with dried lavender, designed to absorb tears in secret. A corset in Berlin that had no front, only a ribbon across the back, so one could be held while dressing, and gloves with small slips of parchment sewn inside, where the wearer would write their dream upon waking, not to read later, only to let go. Others dressed in protest, not of politics, but of pressure. One duchess stopped wearing colour altogether, not out of mourning, but out of exhaustion. Let the world decorate itself, she said. I'll simply arrive. Another wore the same dress every Tuesday, unwashed, untouched, layered with new perfume each week. By December, she whispered, I'll be a memory tower. And through it all, a softness remained, a quiet defiance against utility, against speed, against clarity. Fashion in the 1700s was rarely about dressing the body. It was about undressing the world of rules, of function, of everything sharp and fast and loud. They dressed slowly, carefully, with reverence, and with no intention of being understood. It is a beautiful thing, after all, to live in a world where not everything needs to make sense, where a person can spend hours tying a bow no one will see, where lace is sewn only to kiss the skin once before dissolving, where a slipper is worn to remember someone who will never return. So sleep now, dear listener, in the gentleness of that uselessness. Let the centuries drift away. Let the candles burn low. Let the silk fall to the floor and stay there. The ballroom is empty. The mirrors no longer reflect. The powdered wig lies still on the vanity, beside a glove that holds no hand. And even as fashion became more absurd, more intricate, more untethered from the practical world, something else began to shimmer beneath it all. A kind of longing, because beneath every embroidered glove was a hand that ached to be held. Beneath every towering wig was a head bowed in thought, and beneath every gown stitched from poetry and mirrors was a person trying to be remembered, even if only by moonlight. It's easy to laugh at the ridiculous trends, the paper dresses, the musical shoes, the parasols that told fortunes, but to do so misses the gentle truth of it all. They were reaching for meaning in a world ruled by formality, ritual, and distance. And when meaning felt far away, they wrapped themselves in layers of lace and silk and powder. Because beauty, even when pointless, offered comfort. Think of the woman who refused to wear the same fabric twice. Think of the man who wore a different scent for each day of the week. Think of the tailor who believed every button should be a secret. They lived in a world where words failed often, but fashion did not. And so they spoke in stitches, sighed in ribbons, and wept in color. There are stories of cloaks worn only during specific moon phases, said to catch dreams like dew, of earrings fashioned from quills that had never written a word, of belts with tiny windows sewn in, revealing a patch of linen inscribed with the wearer's greatest fear hidden against the skin. These weren't garments, they were confessions. Sometimes, entire outfits were designed for imaginary events. a gown for a coronation that never came, a cape made for a journey that was never taken, a waistcoat stitched for the day a long-lost love might return. When asked about these, the wearers would simply smile and say, "Hope needs a place to sit." And in time, fashion became not just fabric, but memory, a kind of soft archive. One woman kept a wardrobe organized not by color or season, but by feeling. "This dress remembers the day I stopped waiting," she once said. "That one remembers the day I forgave him. And this one doesn't remember anything. That's why I wear it on days when I don't want to be known." Even the dressing process itself became ritual. A silent hour before sunset, a pause at the mirror, not to adjust, but to ask, "Who am I tonight?" It was an art form of gentle identity, to become someone just for the evening, someone quieter, someone softer, someone who could wear feathers without flight and gold without cost. And when they undressed, the undressing, that too was sacred. Each pin removed like a breath released, each ribbon untied like a memory softened, the powder wiped away, the weight relieved, the person beneath still wrapped in the quiet dignity of having been something else for a while. There's something honest in that, something tender, to know that what you wore didn't matter at all, and still choose beauty anyway, not for applause, not for function, just for the whisper of it, the gesture, the poetry of being seen or not seen in exactly the way you chose. And isn't that what sleep is too? A slipping away from who you were today, a small useless ritual, a quiet costume change into nothingness. So allow yourself that. Take off your thoughts like powdered gloves. Untie your tension like a corset loosened at dusk. Let the stillness fall around you like silk puddling on the floor. You do not need to be useful now. You do not need to be correct or polished or prepared. You are allowed to simply be, wrapped in the velvet of your own breath, cradled by silence, warmed by a kind of peace that doesn't ask why. Let yourself become a soft memory in this room. Just for now, the candle is low, the last fan has closed. Even history, in all its opulence, has gone quiet, and there you are, whole, pointless, beautiful, asleep.